Hi, this is Kirk Billingsley of Big Fish Cider Company in Monterey, Virginia, and you are listening to Cider Chat.
Episode 124. Hello and welcome to Cider Chat. My name is Rhea Windcaller, and I am the producer and cider MC of this weekly podcast, where we speak with makers, cider enthusiasts, and folks within the cider trade from around the world. And this week, we are speaking with folks from Big Fish Cider Company based in Monterey, Virginia. That would be Kirk Billingsley and Sarah Simons Collins. So make sure that cider glass is full, because we're going to be coming back to that chat in just a moment.
Going up, going up, going up.
I'm a firm believer that if I have something good to share, some kind of piece of information, I want to pass it on. And that's a big part of this podcast, is passing on news about Ciderville, not just necessarily in one spot, one country, but around the world. And the one common theme that I hear in my ongoing correspondences with people all over the map, commercial, non-commercial, cider consumers, just people interested in the podcast, is that by listening to this weekly show, they feel connected. They don't feel so alone in their spot of the world. You can bet your bottom dollar that no one is walking into a bar and saying, "What's beer?" or "What's wine?" But they sure as heck are still asking, "What is cider?" So that educational piece is still a long way from that home run hit, where we don't have to be taking our time to educate at the same level that we are currently doing. And that's tiring for folks who are trying to just be discovered as a cidery, or the brand ambassadors who are working for a cidery, or sometimes are the cider makers themselves, probably more often than not are the cider makers themselves. And let's say you're not commercial, you just are someone like me who enjoys cider. Maybe you have celiac disease. You can't have gluten in your diet. There's so many reasons why cider exists in the world for us. That is why staying connected is so darn important. And one of the ways I have been attempting to up my game and increase visibility of cider is by offering cider tours. So I have one going out to Normandy, France in September. And if you even have an inkling of a thought that, well, I'd like to go on that trip, please contact me. And if you want to go on a trip, you can't do it this year, well, help me get this trip off so I could offer it next year. I can't do it without you, Ciderville. You know how that 6 degrees of separation works, where essentially everybody's connected to each other and knows somebody else? Well, I'm counting on you right now to reach out to 5 people that you know could go on this trip. If you are a cidery owner, maybe you want to send a team member, maybe you know some of your patrons or supporters of your cidery who can attend this. But please don't say, well, I'm not thinking about it, and hey, thanks, Rhea, do the podcast, I'll just listen next week. This podcast can simply not survive without your support. And I have a hunch that it is important enough to you to see it continue on. And I'm not asking a lot here other than to talk it up and find those people out there who can go on the Totally Cider Tour to Normandy, France. People that you know. If you own a cider bar, tell people, put up a sign, hey, there's a cider tour going to Normandy, France. Ask me for more info. If you haven't had the opportunity to go to the website yet and check out the itinerary on this trip, well, allow me to share with you some of the key reasons why I think it's such an amazing opportunity for yourself, or what you might be able to tell those 5 people that you're thinking about right now who would get really good value and would want to go on a trip like this. I mean, first you're going to say, well, you're going to be going with Rhea Windcaller. Like, who is that? Besides producing this podcast and speaking to 15 different countries, around the world and the makers there and just about every state in the U.S., I think I have a little bit of information. I won't say I'm an expert, and maybe that's probably one of my best strengths is I don't consider myself an expert in cider by any means. So going with curiosity is a hell of a lot of fun. And yes, if you have been listening to this podcast, you know that I do like to have fun and to travel well. I have a lot of experience with that. I have led a lot of groups over my lifetime in many, many different situations. So I feel very confident in doing this because I've spent so much time already in Normandy setting this up. So I'm hoping that you might enjoy or at least convince your friends that Rhea might be a pretty good person to go along with on this trip. And to top it off, we also have a French interpreter and guide who will be going along too. So that it's not all about me, but really the experience. So you could just drop into it. And that's how I like to travel. I like to drop into it and slow the pace down. I mean, we are in Normandy, for goodness sakes. This is a place where you want to just go out and lay down on the grass on a nice day and kick back with a bottle of cider and some cheese and some bread and really experience that exquisite essence of all that you can ever imagine to be in a French countryside. That's what we're going to be doing. So I've really limited the amount of travel time between different destinations. So there's one, you get to travel with me. And two, we also have a full-on French guide who will help you interpret and ask questions to the makers that we'll be meeting along the way. Three, the pace is super, super chill. I mean, a lot of group tours, you have to be up by 7:30 and out, and nobody wants to be drinking cider or Calvados the night before and go anywhere at 7:30 in the morning. 4, the trip takes place the last week of September, which is the perfect time to be there because that is a time when you could reach up into an apple tree or a pear tree, and the fruit will come easily off and bite into it right then. And I promise I will not stare. In fact, you'll have plenty of room to be able to be on your own to bite into a pear from an ancient pear tree and savor that juice and that terroir. And number 5 is 3 main highlights of the trip that you could really look forward to. First one is we get to drink copious amounts of cider, Poré, Calvados, and Pommeau. And that should be a given on a cider tour, no doubt. But the difference is we are in Normandy, France, drinking copious amounts of these libations. And in that case, it's a whole different ballgame. Because anytime that you go out in the world from this point on, your palate is going to have a really different dimension than most palates out there. It's without a doubt something that one must do if you have a passion for cider. Otherwise, even myself, did I know what Poré was? Hell no. I needed to go to Normandy to be able to taste that. So when I go judging in like a month from now at Glencap, I'll know what the hell I'm talking about. I know what I'm tasting, and I'll be able to decipher it out. You have to drink it, but you have to drink it at the source. And that is exactly what we're doing. Drinking it at the source. It's not going to be traveling 100 miles. We're going to be right in that location where you get to look at the soil, maybe even taste the soil, feel the soil, smell the air, look at the sky, meet the maker, and breathe in Normandy. And 2, I am so looking forward to introducing you to world-class cider makers who will greet you like old friends. I mean, it's so different to go to a cidery and on a tour and not necessarily have the maker there. Maybe you will, maybe you won't. And they're having to like leave something else that they're doing. You pay your money, and it could be kind of impersonal. It really can. Especially if they're just getting a lot of folks kind of coming through. But this is going to be different. They are going to be expecting us. It's like expecting your friends to come along. And I think there's no better way to travel in the world than to go right into the culture immediately, feeling comfortable, cozy, and safe. And the third highlight that I would like you to consider, and also to tell those 5 people that you know can go to Normandy, is that we're going to be going to the UNESCO World Heritage Site, Mount Saint Michel, which has all those amazing little piers on the top, and there's so much history. I talked a little bit about it last week on episode 123. Well, years ago, it was its own kind of island, and now they've built a road out to it, and it's just one of those breathtaking views that has to be on your list to do in your lifetime. Yeah, that is going to be spectacular. I am hoping that you are listening to this podcast before the end of April, like the week it comes out in April 2018, because at the end of the month is when the early bird special ends to put your reservations in. So let's hope that you are a regular listener of this podcast and you listen to it in a timely manner so that you could get those reservations in, and I don't have to walk out on a gangplank and decide whether I'm going to make a business decision that could really take me off the air. Please count yourself in if you can, and if you can't, reach out to 5 people today. There'll be some of the highlights in the show notes if you need some talking points for those friends. When we come back, we're going to be heading into our main chat with Big Fish Cider Company. Well, it is that time now to grab a glass and have a chat with Kirk Billingsley and Sarah Simon Collins of Big Fish Cider Company, based in Monterey, Virginia. This conversation was pre-recorded at CiderCon 2018 in Baltimore. Virginia's in the house on Cider Chat.
Well, it's nice to meet you too. Yeah, I think a lot of your podcast and enjoy reaching out and hearing the news from Ciderville and hearing the cider makers as well as the other people in the industry. It's wonderful. Monterey, Virginia is about 240 full-time residents that live there, and it's in a county that's only got about 2,400 people in the whole county. It's in the Appalachian Mountains. It's west of the Shenandoah Valley in the Allegheny section of the Appalachian Mountains. And our orchards are about 2,700 to 3,200 feet in elevation, and the apples are a lot different because of that. And cider making is a lot different. We're lucky to have the ability to get apples that have absolutely no input. What's beyond organic. There's nothing sprayed. We prune, and that's pretty much all we do. The majority of apples come from orchards that have absolutely nothing sprayed, no fertilizer.
And that's typical in Highland County. That's how people have managed their trees forever. And we have the advantage of climate on our side.
That keeps the bugs down. We have these late frosts that really knock out the apple crop to some extent, and so that really puts a hurting on the insect population, because when they hatch out in the spring and there's no apples to get onto, it really sets them back a long way. So when you have years with no apples, it's hard for us as cider makers, but at the same time, it helps the next year's crop, because the insects will not be, and the diseases are not near as bad.
It helps us manage those things that otherwise we'd be managing chemically or physically.
So what's the lesson here? That we should all be making cider at the elevation of 2,700 feet. Okay, folks, forget the sea level. Start moving up the mountains,
Exactly.
right?
Hey, global warming is coming. You can, move up and into the mountains where it's a little bit cooler, and you have less pressure from heat, from disease, and from the insects.
Well, I'm sure Ciderville listening right now, the folks who are orchardists or, cider makers with orchards are really feeling like, oh, you lucky ducks.
We're lucky when we have apples. Those years that there aren't any apples, that would be a little tough if
Yeah.
you were an orchardist. And that's why there aren't any commercial orchards in Highland County. And there were some planted, but they've really gone to neglect, which is great for us
our benefit.
because much
Right.
to our benefit because we were able to get those apples that nothing sprayed on them. Our main cider orchard is planted with golden russets and northern spies. It's got some Jonagolds, ashmead kernels, and hadn't been cared for years. Dolgo crabs.
crab apple.
Wow.
And
yeah,
so
nice.
we get some wonderful apples out of that orchard. There's about 300 trees in there. And the output, because there's no input to it, the output is probably not that much. We've got about 530 bushels, I think, of apples out of that orchard last year, but they're top quality for cider making.
Because we're managing those orchards, we're going in and selectively picking for ripe apples, not.
Right. We actually go in and we'll gather the ground drops and wait, come back, gather more ground drops and can lightly shake. And we can go back to the same tree a couple different times to make sure that the apples are ripe. And that makes, of course, a big difference in good cider.
What kind of press are you using?
We've got a little Good Nature, what they call a accordion press. It's like a rag and cloth. It's an accordion press that's made up actually around Buffalo, New York, and it's a little press. We knock out about a typical pressing day for us. We only do about 250 gallons, and it takes about 5 or 6 hours to knock out 250 gallons. But that's what we operate on, 250 gallons tanks at a time. Is basically what we're working with.
Are you using a variable, like stainless steel type of wine tank?
No, we've got small tanks. We've got a 2,000 liter and a 1,000 liter jacketed tank. We don't use variable capacity tanks.
Okay.
And then we do some of it in IBCs. We've got the oxygen barrier IBCs that we do some of our fermentation in too.
So I want to go back to the fact that you have 250 people in the town. You're making cider.
And there's not a lot of consumers coming out of the town. One thing good about Highland County, we're about 3 hours from D.C. Market and about the same from Richmond. So we have a lot of weekenders that come back also.
3 hours is 3 hours, though.
Yeah,
so
it's
folks,
3 hours.
That's a pretty dedicated.
But there's a lot of second homeowners in our community,
Okay.
and so especially in the summer, getting out of the swamp of DC and the swamp of Richmond, people come up to the mountains a lot, and so
It's cooler there in the summertime.
I bet.
And so we get some of that traffic,
Yeah.
which really helps us a lot.
Yeah.
And we've got a maple festival that goes on every March that just brings, in a county with 2,400 people, it brings 40 to 50,000 people over 2 weekends, and that really kicks off our year because Highland, if you can imagine, I mean, it's at that elevation. We get a fair amount of snow. It's very, very cold. January, February. And we keep our tasting room open on weekends, but there's not a lot happening until Maple Festival. And then the rest of the year is pretty good through about October. Though we're down in Virginia, we're down southern area of the country because of our elevation. I mean, there's a lot of the things that we grow there or grow wild there that aren't seen pretty much south of Canada. So.
Wow, so interesting. So let's talk about your tasting room because it's in.
In an old, I bought an old building years ago. It was an old restaurant and theater, as a matter of fact.
High ceilings.
In parts of it, yeah. In the theater part of it, it does. But our tasting room it's a small, little, cozy tasting room, and it's only about 20 feet by 20 feet. It's probably it's very
Intimate,
very small.
very intimate.
Square feet,
Nice, nice, perfect.
But we've reclaimed the wood out of the place. It was built in 1920, so it's full of the whole building was pretty much wormy chestnut. So we've been able to come out. I've got a friend that's a really good woodworker. And
Wormy chestnut.
Wormy chestnut, yeah. It was chestnut lumber that back in the late 1800s really got infected by the chestnut blight, killed them.
Yeah.
But the trees are very resistant to water,
Right.
and they just stood there. And of course,
Right.
bugs got to it. And then in the early 1900s, 1910 to 1920, they were cutting those down The wood is good, but they've got wormhole. And it's called wormy chestnut. Of course, they don't, chestnut really don't get to full size in our area of the country anymore. And,
No, they don't,
But the
yeah.
wormy chestnut is a pretty wood.
Well, I bet it is really strong wood too. It reminds me of a book that Barbara Kingsolver wrote, and there's the whole baseline is about chestnuts.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, interesting. That's so fascinating. So you have a tasting room. So is a higher ceiling area? Is that where the cidery is?
Right. That's back in right behind the tasting room is basically our lab where we do the testing and all that. And right beyond that is our tank room, we call it. And right, it's got very high ceilings. We've got walls that are about probably close to 20 inches thick, so we can really control the temperature in there. And
I bet you can.
And so we can keep it 55 degrees in there. I mean, from October all the way through till about at least April. We can keep it into 55. And even in summertime, it rarely gets above 70.
We don't have air
in there.
conditioning. We don't use air conditioning.
Doesn't sound like you need it.
No, they really don't. Yeah, I mean, there's some times like in September, if we're pressing apples in September, it can get warm. So it's one of those things that, okay, you open.
You open up.
I'll go in and open the windows at night, and then when Sarah comes in the morning, she'll close them. So we use the cool air that comes in.
Natural air conditioning.
Yeah, but
Why not?
But
right?
I mean, and that of course that helps with what's in the IBCs. But we can control the temperature on our stainless steel tanks that are jacketed.
So let's talk about your cider making then. Are you doing that approach, which is like low and slow fermentation?
Right. And that's how I did it as a home cider maker. And of course, I follow Claude Jolicoeur. I mean, I think the world of what he's. Of course, I took Peter Mitchell's classes too, which is completely different than Claude Jolicoeur. So I'm somewhere in the middle there. I want some control over the cider, but at the same time, I want to keep it slow. So we really lower the temperature. We operate at the very lowest range and oftentimes below the recommended range for the yeast to keep it slow.
Really slow, okay.
Yeah, we try to ferment our ciders, and it's a whole lot different when we're fermenting the cider from the apples that we get around Highland that are no input orchards. I mean, as I said earlier, beyond organic, there's no input, and so the low nutrients make a nice slow fermentation, and that's nice. But the commercial orchards will it's a little bit tougher to keep those slow because they just want to take off. So you really have to keep chilling the cider down to try to keep that down.
One of our fermentations this year, that was some wild apples that we found out in a pasture in Highland County. The fermentation was like 2.5 months.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was
2 years ago, we had Northern Spies that lasted 3 months.
Yeah,
the
it was
fermentation
like
just
you'd
kept
walk
on.
by and it would the airlock would occasionally bubble, and you'd go, "Oh, you're still fermenting over there."
Well, that's why they call it wild, because they are their own rulers. Those yeasties.
Right, we were
awesome.
lucky, and that's the interesting thing about Highland. It's mountainous, but there's apple trees everywhere. I mean,
Everywhere.
it's
So what
just-
is the history there of all the apple trees everywhere?
It was a farming community. In every small farm, and because it's so mountainous, you don't have big farms. They're all small farms. If you see a 300 or 400 acre farm, it's probably a big farm. So a lot of it was probably close to subsistence. But every farmer would have a few apple trees. I mean, that was really important to rural communities, particularly in the mountains. So. Of course, the trees dropped their apples, and the wildlife picked up the apples,
Kept going.
and you find apple trees. You're walking in the mountain, and all of a sudden there's another apple tree that just
Great.
has
That's
sprung
great.
up. And the field that Sarah was talking about a moment ago, I mean, the cattle farmer came in there and decided to clear the land. It was grown up, but he had enough foresight to say, "Oh golly, there's all these apple trees." He didn't
left it.
And there's probably over 100 apple trees on.
Oh, no kidding.
On this path. So we got in there.
Random
and got,
like plantings, not in rows or anything.
no,
right?
They're not even planted.
They're
just
feral.
wild.
They're
all
wild
feral,
feral
yeah.
trees.
Okay,
They
good,
just grew
good.
from seed.
Good.
And so
Yep.
we went through and we basically did a test on the sugar content. The sugar content was good. We picked the apples, and so I'm looking forward to that. That's the first. We got about 135 gallons of wild apples or cider from wild apples. So I'm looking forward to what we can do with that. The fermentation just finished, so we're getting ready to move to the next step, and we'll probably do a bottle ferment with that. So looking forward to that.
Very nice. Wow. Well, you walked in the room, you opened a bottle of cider immediately, and we started drinking it. This is a Highland Scrumpy sitting in front. Beautiful, beautiful label, a green background with the Big Fish Cider Company and a fish down below. And what kind of fish is that?
That's a trout.
The trout,
Yeah,
okay.
we've got a lot of trout in there. Actually, the name came from the building we bought used to be a restaurant. They were well known for their trout, and the people that owned the building also actually had a sign company here in Baltimore. So they put this 20-foot trout, neon trout, on top of the building. And so when we bought the building, and it's sort of interesting to go back to, I used to make cider in the basement of my house, and then my wife had bought me a cider press, and I kept making more and more, and she came home one day, and it was probably warm September, and the cider fermenting was not smelling as it should. It was a little sulfury smelling, and she walked in the house and she said, "Kirk, never again will you make cider in my house." And so I had to find another spot. But we'd bought this commercial building because my wife had needed office space, and from a friend, and there was all this room down there that I'll just take it down there. So I built this super insulated room down in the building, and when I would go down there, I would always tell my wife, "I'm gonna run down to the Big Fish and check on the cider," and that's how the name came. And,
I see. Okay.
If I took the Big Fish off the top of that building, they would tar and feather me and run me out of
We don't
town.
want
So
that
it's
to
somewhat of
happen.
a
We don't want that to happen.
landmark. No.
Now, when you're making such fantastic cider, this is absolutely delicious.
Oh, thank you.
Just to let Ciderville know what's going on here. So we have this like nice little petulant, tiny little air bubbles going up, and it's like a rich yellow straw color, but the taste it's like a dry kind of nice back taste, nice finish, residual sweetness going on there.
Just a little bit. Yep.
Yeah, a little bit of residual, but I've drank a lot of cider today.
Mm-hmm.
A lot, or I should say, I've drunk a lot of cider. Look, I've been drinking cider. What can I say? But I'm so happy with this because it's really clearing my palate. It's a strong enough cider that it's standing on its own up to all the ciders I've been drinking. It comes through and it doesn't just get lost in my mouth that's been, drinking a lot today.
Yeah, this
really
is an
delicious.
interesting one because we call it our Highland Scrumpy, and it's one of the things I'm trying to get the local folks interested in cider, and being a part of Big Fish Cider is we have a community apple drive every year. So we just say, hey, bring us your apples. We'll give them coupons, or we'll actually pay them cash for whatever apples. There's wonderful old apple trees all over the farms, and people will bring apples, we've got a lot of older folks there. They'll just call us up and say, "Kirk, Sarah, come pick you can have all you want. I'd rather
Nice.
not go to waste." So we go to their farms, we go to their backyards, and we pick apples. And that one, we put them all together, and there's more than 20 varieties in that. And we press it, and we just do a wild ferment with that and just let it go. And then when we tasted it this year, with the many wild ferments, and I often say that the best cider I've ever had comes from a wild ferment, but the worst cider I've ever had comes from a wild ferment. You never know, so I'm always scared to do a whole lot of wild ferment, but we did a wild ferment on this, and it had just a little bit of musty flavor to it. So I decided, well, I'll blend it in with some Northern Spy cider that I had, and I think it's lovely. It's got some nice tannins because of the way we grow the apples. There's no sprays once again, and so they have to fend for themselves as far as disease and bugs. You get a nice tannins in there, and nice acidities. You'll notice that our apples have a lot of acidity. That's a little different from apples that are grown at our elevation compared to Shenandoah Valley, which is a great apple growing region. But we get a little bit more acidity, and because of the no sprays, et cetera, we get some nice tannins in our apples.
Rock solid cider, and the beauty of it is how you were able to make it with this community. Has the cider interest in Monterey and the communities around there kind of grown a little bit more towards cider since
I
you've
think so.
opened?
Yeah, I think so. We've had another cidery pop up just up the road from us. Well, in Franklin, West Virginia.
Is that Swill Dog?
Yeah, Swill Dog. And I know they came and visited us before they were open. But yeah, there's not a huge, as you can imagine, with a county of 2,400 people, there's not a huge local market for cider. But yeah, we have our.
Well, what else is everybody drinking?
Right.
They're drinking.
What else are they going to do?
Because
I know.
part of it is in Monterey, there's 3 restaurants, essential, more or less.
In Monterey with
Monterey.
2,400
There's like
people.
2 little like country southern diners, and then a higher end restaurant that's associated with a local inn. And so if someone wants to go have a drink on a Friday night, the cidery is the place to go. And so that
There's no other bar. Or anything.
There is nothing open on Friday afternoon.
Wow.
except
So
for
you
a
have
convenience store
you
and
have
couple
a
restaurants.
very contained
it is-
audience.
I mean, it is, yeah.
Wow.
There is a drive to, if you want to have that social activity without feeling the need to sit down and order a 3-course meal, that we're the place to come.
And do you have a flight at the tasting room?
No,
too?
we don't. We don't. We rarely that crowded. We've talked about it in the past. I like doing. I want to introduce the ciders to the customers.
Yeah.
I want them to know, okay, this is what apples are in this cider,
Right.
and walk them through it. And if they just get a flight, they can go down. I guess you could give them a piece of paper, but that gives us a chance. I'm a little peculiar that way. I like the cider to be presented in a certain way to them.
And so we offer a tasting, but it's at the bar with kind of a guided tasting. So our
Okay.
staff person is going through each cider and kind of explaining the story of that cider.
Oh, okay,
to a
so like a
person.
winery would do
Oh,
a
yes,
tasting.
exactly,
Okay,
exactly,
all right.
yeah.
So that's wonderful to
So
know.
we're not really a bar. I mean, yeah, you can come in and sit down and have a glass or two of cider, but it's not. Yeah, it's realize we're very, very small. There's 3 tables in there and 12 chairs.
Yeah.
3 tables in there and 12 chairs.
We're actually right now
Good
while
to
we're
know.
here, we're starting to expand the tasting room. We're going to almost double its size.
Wow.
We might have 6 tables.
6 tables?
Right.
And
Wow,
24 chairs.
okay.
Maybe.
Maybe a little tiny stage.
Ooh, for a little music.
For a little,
Yeah.
yeah.
Wow. Well, Monterey is getting on the map in Virginia. If folks are coming down to Big Fish, because that's really the best way to taste some cider.
Oh,
Just
yes.
go right
you
to
get,
the
you get
cider
to taste
house.
them all, pretty much.
So
all
they
of
could
them.
stay at that hotel
Yeah,
that has a
Highland.
restaurant.
Yeah.
What's the name of the hotel?
Highland Inn.
Highland Inn.
Yeah.
Okay. Camping is local to imagine.
There's really not a.
There's
No?
limited options for
Huh.
camping.
We've got a beautiful national forest and all, so it's a lot of primitive camping. The closest campground, I guess, would be down at the Virginia Power has put in a hydroelectric dam just south of us in
Oh.
Bath County, and they've got a very nice recreation area and camping
And
site.
a modern
down there.
camping.
Yeah.
But
Okay,
primitive
good to know.
camping is available in the George Washington National Forest and the Monongahela, just over into West Virginia.
I know that well. Yeah.
And
okay.
then there's a ton of wonderful little bed and breakfasts and a couple little rural inns, and then the Highland Inn, which is our little small hotel
Good.
right in Monterey.
Well, that's okay. I just have a hammock. I'm just going to do
There you
it
go.
from one lamppost to the other.
Do it in summertime, though.
Yeah,
It gets
Okay,
very
all right.
cold.
Well, I am a New Englander, so you
It still
know.
gets cold.
All right, okay. I'll just bivvy out there. You learned your technique from Peter Mitchell, from reading all these like
I
pioneer
started
authors.
years ago. Yeah, I mean, I started making cider about 25 years ago, Maria, just to myself. I mean,
Right,
I grew
right.
up, and my dad would make cider, just fresh squeezed cider, and we would
Right.
have it every fall. And I just loved the flavor of the cider. I remember jumping off the school bus and throwing my books down and running out to the barrel, and we left the barrel outside and grabbing a glass.
Wow.
And Dad would always tell me that, hey, that cider is better if you wait 2 weeks. But I just loved the cider.
Yeah.
And Dad didn't really make hard cider. Actually, when it got to a point, I mean, it would start turning to vinegar, and about the time my mother
I
would say,
see.
Thane, which was my father's name, you better get rid of the cider now.
Okay.
And so, but anyway, I grew up loving that, and I came home from college one time, and I called ahead to see if Dad had made any cider that year, and whether we didn't have a good apple crop or whether he didn't have the free labor to pick apples. He didn't make cider, so I'll pick him up a couple jugs, one for him to hold back a couple of weeks and one to drink that weekend. And it was the most tasteless, listless cider I'd ever had in my life. And I thought, well, what's different about the cider I got over in the Shenandoah Valley compared to ours? And realized it was the old heritage apple trees. And I thought, oh my God, these apple trees are, they're 40 feet tall. They're probably close to 80 to 100 years old. I've got to save these trees. And there was Dr. Elwood Fisher. He was a biology professor that grew up in West Virginia, as a matter of fact, but he taught at JMU, where I went to school. and he had a cider making class, or excuse me, not a cider making class, but a grafting class. I learned how to graft, so I could save those trees.
Wow.
And then realized, because I didn't even know. I knew there was a smokehouse, and there was later I found out, one tree's a Baldwin, and one tree's is a Grimes Golden, and so I realized, we've got to save these. Now, of course, you can find those trees lots of different places,
but still,
but it what it did was open my eyes to the value of those
Absolutely,
trees that were really growing all over the county.
So you got some old trees there.
Oh yeah, my God,
100-year-old trees.
Oh yeah,
Easily
100-year-old
Easily,
trees.
yeah. But those are pretty tall trees. So are you primarily just dealing with drops?
Our orchards actually, I mean, we get some from tall trees, but I don't bounce like I used to, so I don't like climbing that high anymore.
A lot of work.
But really, the orchards we're working with, there was one orchard that was planted in the late 80s. That was the orchard I was talking earlier.
Mm-hmm.
It's got the golden russets, it's got ashmead kernels, it's got northern spies, and the dolgos, et cetera. And that was a semi-dwarf. Those trees probably get up to about 20 feet. They haven't been pruned well over the years. We're just sort of
Some of
getting
the
into the
northern
last couple of
spies
years.
are taller, are going on 30.
Yeah,
Wow.
but they're so we get we get a lot of our apples from those, and then the other two orchards are both semi-dwarf orchards too, and we prune those a little bit better. We got a hold of them when they were younger, so we're able to keep those size controlled a little bit better. But we also still, we go out to the farms and backyards to get apples from the trees. We just take the ladders and go up and get them.
That's right. That's
I'm a bit of a monkey.
good. That's a good trait to have.
She still bounces. I don't.
Wonderful, wonderful. We need more monkeys. When did you go commercial? What year?
2015, I guess.
2015. So this is pretty recent, really,
Yes,
for
very
you.
recent. Very recent.
Learning curve. Looking back, what did you, if you look back now, just in that 3-year span of time, anything you do differently?
That is a darn good question. No, I don't think so. I mean, maybe some equipment purchases might have been a little bit different. But no, I mean, we actually, the first year out, we got a Glen Cap Best in Show award. I mean, the first year. I mean, we're blessed with good apples. I mean, that's it. And that's the
that's a
secret
big
to
thing.
cider
It's all
making. I mean,
about-
there's
yeah.
no secret to cider making. If you can get the right variety apples that are grown with no input or very, very little input,
And are allowed
you
to
can make cider.
ripen all
On
the
the
way
tree.
on the trees.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah, we really haven't. I've learned some things. Like the first year, we also make a maple barrel aged, which we'll
Open up.
open up in
goody,
a
goody.
little bit, so you can
Goody,
taste
goody.
that.
Whoa.
But we used too much maple syrup, and it was too strong on the maple syrup. So we learned, you learn things like that. And barrel aging, you got to be careful.
Well, let's talk about barrel aging.
I'm not a big fan of barrel aging.
Okay, tell me. Well,
We
it's
make
not
it
easy.
because people like it.
Yeah.
To me, apple's such a delicate flavor that it can get lost so easily in the taste of oak. And really, our apples, we have so much tannin in them. You really don't
Yeah.
need the tannin from the oak.
Well,
but
what kind of barrels are you using?
I'm using
'Cause
brandy barrels, apple
so
brandy
that
barrels.
will overwhelm the apple for
That
sure.
will, and so this year when we did it, we basically washed out the barrels a lot better than we have in the years past. Try to get any residual as much as we can. I mean, obviously it's in wood, and then we also only put a portion of the cider in the barrels to age instead of putting 100% of them in barrel aging. We only did about 60% of the cider in barrels, and that brought down the flavor of the oak a little bit. But we had better apples this year. With a little higher acidity, so and I'm
Beautiful.
more pleased with this. That once again, I'm not a big fan of barrel aging, but you got to make what sells, and people love barrel aged whatever. So, and actually, I do like this cider.
All right. Well, he has in his hand now. Sarah pulled out this bottle.
And it's called
That's a
Monterey
green-
Maple. Monterey, of course, is a town and maple syrup is big in our particular area of Virginia. And once again, we have a maple festival that's very popular every second and third weekend of March. So pretty much all of our ciders, you're going to find sort of a consistent theme that we're using local ingredients. We use local maple syrup. We make a cider. We didn't bring that. Local honey. We have a fire cider. You ever heard of fire
Yes,
cider?
I have,
And we call
yeah.
it fire cider because you can't call it
Oh,
fire
look at
cider
that
in the
pretty
U.S.
bottle there. That beautiful fish
but
again.
it's we take it to a local sugar camp, and we basically boil it down to about 1/3 of its original volume,
Wow.
and then ferment that.
Wow.
We do a raspberry cider that's very, very popular. and it's made with there's a farm just across the mountain from us that grows a lot of produce, and they grow some wonderful raspberries, and we get their raspberries. So yeah, the consistent theme is we're using local products. Yep.
Now, just on your packaging, 750 ml bottles. People want to get Big Fish Cider Company. They have to go to the tasting room.
We're distributed in Virginia, in the state of Virginia, and right now our distribution area is the city of Richmond, Charlottesville, Crozet, Harrisonburg, Stanton, Roanoke, Blacksburg, and anywhere in Virginia we can ship.
So you're producing enough cider to be able to do that.
Oh,
Yeah, there's not a lot of demand in Monterey. But
Monterey is looking better and better to me. I'm telling you, Monterey is the place to go.
It's kind of like a small town in New England, except that you're down in Virginia.
Yeah. Isn't that interesting? Wow.
Come visit us. Do come visit us.
Come on down.
Well, I couldn't think of anything better to do with my time than to go to Monterey and hang out with you folks. Which is absolutely delightful.
Right now, you're only about 4 hours away.
Only 4 hours. Well,
so for us, everything, I mean, grocery store, everything is an hour away. So, I mean, town is an hour away. And so our perspective on distance is maybe a little skewed.
Yep.
That's kind of like a Western's view on distance.
Yeah.
You go 90 miles is not a big deal.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, East
Except our
Coast a little
90
different.
miles are
Or
and over
really, or
mountains.
straight out. Yeah,
ours is like
windy.
Yeah.
Wow.
Up and down,
Well, you
up
have
and
to
down,
have
up
a
and
certain
down.
kind of like chutzpah to be able to live in that kind of country, right?
well, I don't know if you were born there. You don't know any different like I was.
That's true. That's true.
So I don't know if I've got it or not. But anyway,
I was born over in Nelson County, which is south of Charlottesville. But I grew up on a non-working farm, and so I have. I mean, it was the way I describe it is until you make that decision to leave. I grew up just as far away from everything as we are in Highland County, and my husband grew up in Highland County, and he was born at home on the very western edge of the county, and in a blizzard in March, and and it's just what it is.
Yeah,
it's normal. And
right.
So.
I love that. I love it. All right, so you've just poured it's called the
Monterey Maple. So yeah, this one is a mixture of actually Gold Rush apples, Northern Spy apples. Do you remember what
Jonna
other?
Gold and Mutsu.
And Jonna Gold and Mutsu. Yeah,
Okay,
that's right.
Mutsu.
And so we fermented that.
So you know what these trees are that
Well,
are these feral trees?
all of the ciders we make aren't from feral trees.
Okay.
Just some of them. I
Okay.
mean, we know that the commercial orchards that are in Highland, or the 3 orchards, we know what apples they are.
The 3 orchards that we manage
Yeah.
in Highland. And
But
then,
we get wild apples that we do on
Cheers.
other things. Same to you. Yeah.
Cheers.
and we do get some apples from commercial orchards outside of Highland. We're not quite on the scale yet of being able to produce all the apples that we need. And so the Mutsu and the Jonna Gold, though we are growing Jonna Gold, this particular batch some of those came from a commercial orchard out in Nelson County.
Okay.
And Mutsu is an apple I like, particularly coming from the valley. It's a little bit lower acid, and once again, most of our apples that we grow are fairly high acid. So every now and then we buy some from the valley to help tone down our acid just a little bit.
So this is what's the ABV on this?
This particular one is
8.4.
about 8.4. Yeah.
8.4,
Because
okay,
it's a
yeah.
little higher alcohol content because we
right
add maple
on the
syrup.
verge there, right,
Right
of
on
the
that
cider
line.
act,
Yeah.
which is 8.5 before you start getting taxed at a different rate.
Yeah, well, and I don't look at that. I mean, we really don't look at that when
I
I'm making
know.
the cider. But
Yeah.
we basically, it's about 250 gallons of cider that we added about 10 gallons of maple syrup to, and that's what it brought the
Really
ABV up to.
subtle.
Yeah.
And was this in the barrel?
This
It was
was
in the
barrel.
bourbon
in brandy.
brandy barrel.
Which we get our barrels locally too.
Well, over near Charlottesville, North
Yeah, I
Garden,
mean,
Virginia.
Yeah, there's a brandy producer in Albemarle County.
Wow.
Near Albemarle Cider Works.
Oh, okay.
And so we get our barrels from them. And
Nice.
So again, we try and source everything.
As much as we can, right?
So you have this kind of like cleansing, the dry cider kind of
Right. It's-
drop,
our
even though
ciders
it's
are-
maple though,
Right,
So you
right.
have that kind of the sweet and the dry there, really working together.
If you're thinking pancake syrup, you're not going to get it
No,
out of that.
not at all.
Really what you're getting, when you take the
Slight.
sweetness away from maple syrup, there's a woodiness that comes from it, and it's completely different than what you put on your pancakes.
Yeah.
This earthiness. I like to describe it as the essence of maple syrup. It's basically what you get if you take away the sugar part of maple syrup.
Now, your yeast that you're working with here, do you have kind of like a house yeast that you do, or do you switch around a bit?
I've in my 25 years of cider making, a lot of what I did was yeast trials. I mean, there's some yeast I like, there's some yeast I don't. I've pretty much come to, first of all, I like to do slow cold ferment, so I'm looking for yeast that
can
will
handle that,
tolerate
yeah.
50 degrees and 55 degrees.
Yeah.
So there's and they're typically white wine yeast, and there's a yeast I think from Australia that I use. There's a yeast from Austria that I use, and there's a German yeast, and there's French yeast that I use. And
that's good. I like the multicultural element of that.
And there's certain things. There's certain yeast I'll use with different apples. There's some that'll soften the acid, like 71B is a yeast
classic.
that'll bring down the. I don't use 71B, but there's other yeast that have that same quality that will just sort of take the edge off that acid a little bit. And then there's some apples that you don't want to tone down that acid at all. So you can use more of almost a champagne style yeast. I don't use champagne yeast, but
we're still doing yeast trials. I mean, we still do we ferment single varietal as a general rule. Our blended ciders, like the Monterey Maple that we're adding the maple syrup at the beginning, and our Sizer and our Churchill Blush, which is the one that has the raspberries in it. We blend those at pressing. But a lot of our other ciders, including the Scrumpy, we are pretty much fermenting single varietal, or with the Scrumpy, the wild apples kind of go into one batch, and then single varieties go into other batches.
And then you blend.
And then we blend post-fermentation.
That's how we do our Allegheny Gold and our Crab Bottom Pip and some of our higher end ciders. We will do that way, and so we don't have a set, 25% of this apple, 15% of this apple.
Yeah.
We basically there's people that have younger taste buds than mine that haven't eaten all the spicy food that I have that really can pick up on the nuances of the flavors, and I'll bring them in and we'll do blind taste test and I'll put out 4 or 5 different ciders and different blends of what I know the structure that I'm looking for in the cider. I know what the taste profile is, and then I'll let them judge the ciders and pick what they like, and then that's how I come up with my blend. I'm not a big fan of never have been of single varietals. I love to drink them, but there's not much complexity to a single variety cider. I like several different apples in it to really balance each other out to me, and that's what we do when we do our blending.
So what I'm getting is that there's that low temperature is really key to Big Fish.
Yes.
Sounds like a little bit lower than some makers, for sure.
Oh yeah, I'll take it down. I've taken it down in the 40s. I mean, if the fermentation is going too fast, if I'm knocking out 4 or 5 specific gravities a day, it's like that's too fast. I will take it under the temperature. And sometimes I will get a little touch of sulfur, and then hey, better bring the temperature back up a little bit.
Too slow.
But really, the sulfur smells typically come from the nutrient deficiency and not the temperature as much.
Do you add anything into your cider, doing yeast nutrients, or
whenever I need to?
How do you stop fermentation too?
How do I stop fermentation?
Yeah.
Pretty much, we let everything go to dryness, and then we'll
even this maple.
The maple, that goes completely to dryness, and then we age it. And that one's got
it's about a 0.25%.
About a 0.25% residual sugar. We actually back sweeten it with quarter just to take the edge off, because once again our ciders are so acidic. We just do just a little bit. That's what we consider
no filtration or just racking.
No, we do. We will filter that after it comes out of the barrel.
But you're just filtering it.
You'll get some charcoal coming through with it.
Chunks of charcoal.
Oh yeah, right.
So we do. We'll run it through the
charred.
filter.
Yeah. So you do some filtration, but you're not doing that to get the yeast out. It's just
we're not doing sterile
just to make it bright, because it's really nice clarity. And back sweetening. You know what I like hearing here, and I think it's good for anyone making cider, whether commercial or not commercial, is the fact that you're not afraid to go dry.
Right.
And then you add that little bit of sweetness, and it pops it back up. I think, why the heck not? You know?
Yeah, and I think a lot of it is the balance with the acid. I mean, if it's very acid, like of the ciders and like the apples that we have in Highland County, you really need to balance that out just a little bit.
Right.
You need to take the edge off that acid, and so going 0.25% on this one, or maybe closer to 1% on the scrumpy, what it does is really take the edge off that acid. And you're once again you're trying to meet your consumer. You're trying to meet what they like. I mean, I'm always trying to pull them to the drier side, but if it's pure dry, it doesn't sell.
Our,
No,
our
you need
best
a little
seller
bit.
is our Churchill Blush, which is made with raspberries, so it's got some additional fruitiness in addition to the apples, and it's a medium sweet cider. But my mother's favorite cider for the first 2 years was Churchill Blush, and recently I brought home a bottle of Crab Bottom Pippin, which is also has about 0.25% residual sugar and it's got crab apples in it, so it's got high acid. And she said, "Oh, let me taste that again." And she goes, "Oh, I really like that."
So we're training
our customers.
Well, because, the palate develops over time.
It does.
Yeah.
Yeah, how exciting. Well, thank you for doing that. And thanks for your mom, for being so open. Well, again, I just really want Ciderville listening to this conversation that there's so many folks who want to say, how do I stop fermentation? How do I stop fermentation? And if you're starting out, or even if you've been in the game for a while, don't worry about it. Let it go dry. You can back sweeten a little bit, but also letting it go dry, you get that minerality of the apples.
Right.
Just want to say, fear not the dryness.
Right.
Because it'll also help you too with the finish and the mouthfeel. And I think you really are spot on with these ciders.
I think you get
I'm
a
impressed.
real sense of like the true flavor when you let it go all the way dry. I mean, that's the way that we prefer to do our tasting, is taste it all the way dry, and we really know the true flavors that we're getting that way.
Yeah.
And once again, once a little bit of taking off the edge of that acid, and then all of a sudden other flavors will pop. So
That's right.
It doesn't take much just to that's what I'm looking
Right.
for. That's the flavor I'm looking for.
So the maple here, the Monterey maple, when do you add the maple?
The same day we press.
The same day. So
Yeah.
you
It's
put
not
it
it's
in.
not back sweetened with maple syrup at all. No,
At all. So the
we
maple
basically-
has been fermented.
Yeah, the maple
And
syrup
what
has been
grade are you
fermented.
using?
That one was actually grade B maple syrup in that
Which is stronger. I mean, I
Right,
prefer
it's a little bit
have
darker.
a grade B.
On the pancakes, I like grade A.
Yeah.
I love the lighter color, the better.
I'm a B. I'm a B person.
I'm
That's
an A.
okay. Everybody
But
to each
for
their
cider,
own.
and actually the first year I made this, I used 15 gallons of grade B, and it was a little bit overwhelming with the maple flavor, so we backed it off. But it's and I haven't been able to get that much grade A, but I'd like
a
to
little
try
harder.
grade A.
Yeah. So, cider making tips for folks who are out there in Ciderville?
I think quite honestly, it's, as we've mentioned before, it's really the apples and how they're grown is going to help you.
But okay, well that's cool. That's
Okay.
cool. You're a lucky duck that
Yeah,
you have
I
good
am.
apples.
Most people don't.
All right, so a lot of people don't.
The second
have that.
the second thing you can do is your fermentation. Control your fermentation. Don't just throw champagne yeast in there. Champagne yeast will take that thing to way beyond complete dryness, and it gives it sort of a one-dimensional. Experiment with some yeast. That's one of my main things that I did for years before I went commercial, was play around with different yeast, and you'll find some yeast that will actually bring some floral qualities out. You'll find yeast that will bring other things out, and then all of a sudden, hey, I want to mix those two together, and you can get some wonderful blends. I think really yeast is, and look at white wine yeast. I mean, I've actually haven't experimented that much with red wine yeast, but white wine yeast, especially from Germany, look at regions that like sweet ciders. Like Germany.
Right.
Or sweet wines.
Or sweet wines, right. Well,
Yeah.
they make sweet cider in
Right, yeah,
Germany
yeah,
too. But look, sweet wines, exactly. They like fruitiness. They want different things coming through on their wines, and those yeast typically will bring those fruity notes out of the apple the same way they do the wines. I'm making cider to my palate. I told my wife, I mean, if this thing goes under, at least I'll have a lot of cider that I like to drink.
Well, I have a feeling, tasting this cider, you are not going to go under. Yeah. So, okay, you brought out a different bottle here.
We'll let you try the fire cider, and this is one. I don't know if there's another fire cider being made commercially in the U.S.
Yeah, I don't know.
But I know it's one that they used to make in Canada. I read that in Claude Jolicoeur's book, and I thought, my God, we've got maple syrup producers all around the county. And so I've got a buddy, Doug Puffenbarger's maple sugar camp, and I took it to him, and we took 550 gallons up, and we put it in the evaporating pan, and we evaporated it down to 1/3 of its original volume. And what you'll notice, this is just a little bit cloudy because the heat that we put on it. You will have caramel notes that come through.
You're pouring it out, and it's. Let me get a little clip on that, just so people could see how.
It didn't get the blub 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 that time.
No.
Which I think is what you were looking for.
No, actually, I was looking at the viscosity of it. Was amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's about 15. This is about 15% residual sugar.
Yeah.
In this, so when you and you'll pick up on that, but
Yeah,
on your
look at the
nose,
legs
pick
on
up
that.
on your nose.
Wow.
You get the caramel notes right away.
Yeah, you do.
And there's nothing happening. So many people come to me and say,
Wow.
"What do you add to this cider?" And it's like there's absolutely nothing to add to the cider. It's just apples that have been.
Well, there's about 30 hours of love.
30 hours.
I'm
Like
sitting beside an evaporating pan
Evaporating
and
pan.
waiting.
Watching it boil. It's literally watching cider boil for 30 hours.
so you have the fresh pressed apple juice that you boil down
Yes.
to a certain.
Right.
Well, how do you know when to stop?
You're basically using
a syrup
hydrometer.
hydrometer.
We're using a hydrometer to see
Oh,
where the
mother.
sugar level is. Now, the
Wow.
thing that you don't realize is how much you have to adjust that temperature. So we actually took this a little bit sweeter, a little bit more residual sugar than I wanted to. So it's a little bit, but it actually the balance is nice.
Well, and you pull it, all of a sudden you go, oh my gosh, we're there, and you pull it off, and that thing is still
And it continues-
hot.
it continues to evaporate.
And it was about 10 degrees outside, and our tank was outside, and so we would continue, we'd pull the hot cider off, and it would continue to evaporate, and so it got thicker than we meant for
Oh,
it
no.
to.
But it actually turned out very, very nicely.
Yeah, it
And so it's
certainly did. So you boil it down,
Right.
and yeast selection here now.
Now
is-
that's 171B. That's 171B.
No kidding.
Because not
wow.
only you're concentrating
it
the
could
sugar.
tolerate that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Not only are you concentrating the sugar, you're concentrating the acid in there too. And so that's the situation. You want to bring some of that acidity down. And so we used actually a 71B on that particular cider. And we fermented it. God, how long did we ferment it? And
It fermented like 4 months.
yeah,
At least 4 months.
And of course, to stop the rest of the fermentation, you're just continually racking the cider, right?
Rack
So
it, filter it, rack it,
yep.
filter it.
Yep. So we just kept doing that over and over. And of course, every time you do it, it slows the fermentation down. And finally, it just, it was in
So
July, it finally just stopped. Thankfully.
Or didn't
So it actually will stop because that's
Yeah.
a thing with like ice ciders is folks are making it and it'll start re-fermenting again.
Right.
Well-
And we actually had that situation on this. We did it, and we were in July, and finally it stopped. So I took bottles, and in the area of the building that we haven't fixed up yet, I set one bottle over there, put a cap on it, and it gets 80 degrees in there, and the sun comes in there. So I thought, well, we'll see, we'll give it a month. So I left it over there for a month, and I brought it back over, and we popped the top. Nothing. There was no pressure to it, and all. I thought, okay, now we have it. So we bottled everything up. And that was in September. And then I remember it was a month later, October, and I went in to check out the tasting room, and
Like on
we
a
were
Saturday.
serving
You went
on a
in
Saturday, and they were
Saturday.
busy, so I went in there, and we need to open another bottle, so I got the cork out and had just a little bit of, just a
little.
wait a minute, that shouldn't have done that.
Yeah.
And so Monday I was off. Must have been a holiday weekend. Monday I was off. I came in there and we grabbed 3 or 4 bottles and just shook as much as we could, and took the corks out. And sure enough, they foamed up just a little bit. So I thought, oh no, it hasn't stopped. So then it's like, now
What
do?
What do you do?
I'll tell you what you do.
Yeah, I want to know because this is a big question for a lot of makers.
Realize that this is fireside, so it's already undergone heat, right?
Yes.
It killed everything way back when, so heat's not going to bother it. So we basically got, of course, they're all corked, so we took
But
champagne
they're
crowns.
not corked with champagne cork.
No, and
they're corked with regular wine corks.
So we thought and you can't put bottle caps on these bottles.
No, you can't.
So basically, we just took champagne hoods,
We
put
set up
on
a
there,
little factory in the lab.
and because the size is not right, we tried to change a little bit the size so it wouldn't come out much, and then we pasteurized all the remaining bottles of Fireside that we had.
You pasteurized it. So just to catch Ciderville up, the bottles that we're talking about, this is not a 750 ml bottle.
This is a 375. They call it a Bellissimo, but it's a very thin, elegant bottle, and just corked.
like
there's
a dessert,
there's no crown cap.
a dessert wine cider bottle that you would get like a ice cider in. I've always found it a very sexy bottle. I don't know why.
Yeah,
No, they are.
that's what I refer to.
It is. It
That's what I
is.
refer
You
to
know,
it as.
you know that it's like, okay, this is like the hour of just
Well,
like kicking back and enjoying
Like
it.
Kirk said when we were trying to figure out exactly where the label went on this bottle, it was like you don't want to show too much leg and you don't want her dress to be cut too low. And
Just perfect.
just,
yeah,
we had to
yeah.
find a place to put it.
Beautiful label too. I mean, the way that the color of your label blends with the actual color of the cider
Right.
is like a match made in heaven. It really is. I mean, was that on purpose?
Yeah, I mean,
It was? Oh,
wanted,
my goodness.
You look at all of our other labels; they were like that. I wanted
the fish
something,
is the same color. The fishes are that standard color that
right?
we've used.
Right.
And
And which has
somehow
always
it
been
just
the cider,
works.
color of cider. Yep.
Yeah, really lovely. Yeah, and you have a nice dry to sweet scale. Of
But
course,
what's
it's on the
interesting,
Yeah.
what's interesting about the re-fermentation in the bottle, that was the best cider. It has a little bit of sparkle to it, which you don't get out of this because it's been pasteurized. But I've still got some of the original bottles in my basement beside my
keeping
furnace.
it cold.
No,
Oh,
Trying to
trying to
trying
see.
to get it-
I want to see if they'll blow. Never have.
Oh,
They never
I
have. I
know,
guess they were just so
yeah.
close to being done. And when you do pop one, we actually had a cider dinner at the Highland Inn we were talking about earlier, and that was our dessert cider, which we paired with. I think it was an apple crisp or something. Very good. But every glass you poured, because this was the unpasteurized cider.
had a
Nice little bit of
Mousse.
a little mousse to it, and it was just
Wow,
really picked it up on your tongue quite a bit.
So Rhea just called out our apple scale on the labels, and I think it's worth saying that that's something that we think is really cool and something that we do on all of our cider. You'll turn that one around. So
You have a
can
scale
see
on
it.
that too?
Yeah, so
Right.
every
Oh, I see.
label has that.
Brilliant.
The dry to sweet scale, so that it's really, we try and make it accessible to someone. And like if they go into the market, like one of the markets that we're in, let's say they go into Foods of All Nations in Charlottesville, and the Frankie the winemonger isn't there.
Frankie the winemonger. Who are these people? Jeez, it
Frankie
sounds like
and
you're in like the
Tom,
north
like-
end of Boston here.
Yeah, like
Frankie the
and Tom,
winemonger.
and they like run the wine cave in this funny little like international grocery that we're in Charlottesville.
No kidding.
As a for instance, if they're not there and they can't tell you about these ciders because they know their stuff, but they're not always there, and you can turn it around and you can say, okay, I like a dry cider, and you can go, oh, these are dry,
Yeah.
or I don't like dry.
Yeah.
I'm going to go for this one that's sweeter, like the
Yeah.
Churchill Blush
Brilliant.
or the
Yeah.
Fireside. And so it makes it accessible outside of our tasting room, and that's something
Yes.
that we pride ourselves on.
Yeah, and it's a fun little scale because you have an apple that's moving back and forth on the scale. So we have some photos of that. People will be able to see that in the show notes for sure. Keep up the good work at Big Fish Cider Company. I'm really impressed. It's such a privilege to be able to sit down and have this conversation with you.
Well, thank you, Rhea.
Thank you so much. You can see photos from this recording and the show notes at ciderchat.com. This is episode 124. Although it wasn't mentioned during this conversation, Big Fish Cider Company is part of the Cider Going Up campaign at Patreon. So a big tip of the glass to both Kurt and Sarah and the good people down in Monterey, Virginia, who are helping to pick those apples and keep cider alive and going up. And I also want to give a tip of the glass to all the good folks who help this podcast each month via the Cider Chat Patreon page, and those commercial cideries too, such as Current Cider, We've been seeing a bit of posting there from the cider maker, Joe Getz, on social media. Looking good, Joe. Also, Ramborn Cider Company in Luxembourg. There's going to be a chat coming up with Carlos soon. And also NMR Services, based in Danbury, Connecticut, doing analysis of a cider. There'll be a podcast coming up on that shortly. And Ross on Wye, based in Ross on Wye in the West Country of the UK. I'm just slurping it all up, thinking about it, making me thirsty. So I'm going to have to get myself a bottle of cider soon. But before I do, I want to give a big thank you to Iron Bark Cider Works, and that's based in Claremont, California, who made a donation to Cider Chat this week. A big thank you to Kat and the team there. This cidery is based in Claremont, California. They have a tasting room. It's a lovely college town, I think I would call it. And there's some beautiful mountain and hiking in the area. A nice little stop in if you're flying into Ontario or Palm Springs and then heading west to LA. Definitely make a stop there. It was nice to hear that Kat finds a lot of good value in this podcast and considers it an excellent platform where all the posts are so relevant to their growing business. Thank you very much, and a big tip of the glass. Well, before I get that bottle and open it up, I'm going to be making one more reminder to you to reach out to 5 people that you know need to know about that Normandy Cider Tour coming up this September. I'm counting on you, Ciderville, to get the word out so we keep cider going up around the world. In the meanwhile, I'm going to start rolling out of here. This is Rio Windcaller signing off for now. Looking forward to seeing you in Ciderville.
Going up, going up.
Yeehaw!